Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone, wherever you may be in the world at this very special moment. Thank you for joining us on this solemn occasion as we gather to express our love and our gratitude to Richard Driehaus, our good friend and our benefactor. I'm Stefanos Polizoidis, Dean of the University of Notre Dame School of Architecture and the chair of the jury for the Driehaus Prize. It is shocking to think that Richard is no longer with us. And it is not because of what he already accomplished with us and for us, but because of what he could have still done together had he lived longer. Behind that friendly smile and easygoing manner, there was a brilliant strategic mind that helped turn the cause of a new traditional architecture and a new urbanism into a mighty movement. In the decades that I knew him as a juror of the Manzano Prize and then as the new Dean of Architecture here, he never stopped thinking about how to make this movement mightier yet. This was indeed the subject matter of our last meeting only just a few weeks ago. It took courage, compassion, and vision to do what Richard accomplished throughout his life. A lot of people have genuine interests and reasonable ideas about how to realize them. Others have access to deep financial resources. Richard was a rare human being that had both. And during the last 20 years, he managed to put them both into action. His giving never strayed from his basic interests, supporting beauty as a core cause in art and architecture, restoring faith in traditional urbanism, practicing a healing relationship with nature, and helping people to live their lives in dignity and in peace. Shockingly, to my knowledge, he was the only person in the world that was willing to pursue these particular causes while also giving generously of his time and of his money. The magnitude of his accomplishments will certainly outlive him. We are already missing Richard and hugely, the human being that was taken from us. But the sudden jolt in the face of death has made it very obvious that his presence, his influence, his inspiration was far grander than we had ever imagined. And that the best way forward for all of us individually and together is to turn grief into resolve and continue to struggle to save this planet from randomness, carelessness, ugliness, wastefulness, and superficiality, just as he would have continued to do had he lived longer among us. We have gathered today in order to remember and appreciate Richard's life and the towering presence of his spirit among us. We have asked 4 speakers to reach back and recall how they came to know him and how his insights and generosity changed the course of their lives and in the process, the course of our beloved discipline of architecture. Our first speaker is Michael Ikoudis, a professor, architect, and urbanist, a member of the Driehaus Prize jury, my predecessor as dean of the school, and Richard's partner in creating the prize and ensuring its success over the past 19 years. Michael?
Thank you, Stefan. The news of the passing of Driehaus has brought us much sadness. His work as a patron of architecture, the arts, and culture has had an impact worldwide. The passion he brought and his authentic reverence and enthusiasm for all things beautiful was a bright light that shone on all that he embraced and beyond. His absence will be equally felt in all corners of the earth. Those who are part of Richard's community represent the wonder of the many different cultures that occupy the great cities, towns, and landscapes of our planet, and what we as humans share in common. Richard supported a wide range of cultural endeavors. His promotion and sponsorship of Chicago artistic and cultural organizations ranged from dance and theater companies to architecture and the visual arts. Of particular note was his founding of one of Chicago's most popular institutions to visit, the Richard H. Driehaus Museum. His love for industrial design and mid-20th century automobiles stretched his aesthetic interests and illustrated the fluidity of his mind, which linked his seemingly eclectic collection of artifacts into a coherent whole that allowed others to see the connection between various mediums and disciplines. Richard and I collaborated on the Richard H. Driehaus Prize and the Henry Hope Reed Award. The nearly 20-year history of the prize also illustrates Richard's mission with his philanthropy and the worldview that generated his success in business and all that he undertook. I first met Richard in the fall of 2002, when Nathan Hatch, the provost of the university at the time, called me to his office to introduce me to a new patron of the school, Richard Driehaus. Nathan outlined how Richard wished to create a $100,000 prize for classical and traditional architecture and asked me to go to Chicago to discuss the possibilities. After a few phone calls, I found myself in front of a building on Erie Street that I'd always stopped to admire, the Ransom Cable residence by Henry Ives Cobb and Samuel Frost. This was the office of Richard Driehaus, along with its beautiful garden and parked antique cars. Richard and I discussed his interest in creating a prize for classical architecture and presenting it through the School of Architecture. He made it clear that he wanted to have an impact in the world of architecture and how tradition would become part of the national and international dialogue. He felt a great pride in being from Chicago and the role that the city has played in shaping the built environment around the world. He recognized the importance of ceremony to publicize and celebrate the event. We did not realize at the time how important this part of the prize was to become to the international traditional architectural community. We also talked about the symbol of the prize and that it should be something beautiful and enduring. We settled upon a bronze model of the Karadzic monument of Lysikrates in Athens. The monument itself was a celebration of a laureate of a cultural competition and the first building to use the Corinthian order on its exterior. Its long history as part of other buildings and its use as a well-known poet's library added to the appropriateness of the monument as a symbol of our prize. I should add that since the 1980s and 90s, the word classical, as it was used by many of those of us who embraced classicism, was all-encompassing and inclusive in its meaning. It included urbanism, the vernacular, and the monumental architecture of the world's diverse cultures. The first two Driehaus Prize juries consisted of Elizabeth Platter-Zeeberg, principal at Duane Platter-Zeeberg Architects and dean of the School of Architecture at the University of Miami, Thomas Fisher, dean of the School of Architecture at the University of Minnesota and former editor-in-chief of Progressive Architecture, and Jacqueline Robertson, the former dean of the School of Architecture at the University of Virginia. It was important that the prize be seen as engaging a broad audience and one that embraced the modern world. The members of the jury reflected this principle. The mission of the Driehaus Prize began to evolve from early meetings of the jury and Richard. Richard early on had recognized that it was an opportunity to acknowledge the world's shared building traditions and their role in shaping the future. Its primary intention was to develop a forum for a real conversation within the profession and the academy about the role of tradition, classicism, urbanism, and architecture. The giving of the prize was not so much a rank order of excellence, but rather a way of bringing to light the many dimensions of tradition in various parts of the world and how these traditions can play a role in thinking about the critical issues facing our built environment. It was important to Richard that the prize demonstrate that classicism was not simply a style or a fleeting art movement, but that it was an integrated, comprehensive, intellectual approach to building cities and their buildings. Moreover, it aspired to present tradition and the classical as a projection of a society's highest aspirations into the future, thus ensuring the continuation of the best, perhaps the most sustainable aspects of a culture. He believed in success, but success was not enough. More importantly, success had to be based on high principles in creating enduring value. Richard's efforts promoted the idea that tradition is not mere duplication, but rather a process that is always inventing and innovating upon itself. It is the inventive quality of tradition that allows each generation and region to shape the future in its own manner, and it is tradition's projection forward of the past that provides a sense of stewardship that's required for sustainability. This is the kind of value that Richard sought through his wide range of efforts. He would often speak about how tradition and invention were inextricably tied together through examples in business, the arts, and public service. When we look at almost all cultures and their cities, towns, and villages, no matter in what latitude or longitude they sit, they possess lessons that apply almost universally. While these lessons are applied with an adaptation to local and regional conditions such as climate, geology, geography, and culture, one can see certain criteria and principles employed in what we would call the normative conditions around the world. Revealing these attributes about the world's traditions gave much joy to Richard. We often spoke about the constellation of ideas that were being presented through the laureates of the prizes and awards he supported, and through the dialogue that ensued. Richard knew that his efforts had to have modern applications, and that the globalization of the world needed another narrative to give access, meaning, and value to all peoples. All architecture and urbanism are local, but there are several principles that almost all cultures follow with respect to the art of building cities and their buildings: compactness and accessibility, durability and resilience, economy and utility, environmental harmony and beauty. These principles guide the design and construction of cities and their buildings in almost every corner of the earth, such that there is an overlapping, integrated, and interrelated system that governs the composition and relationship of the entire ecosystem of the planet, region, and locality. Richard reveled in the uncovering and presentation of these ideas, and his effort to support the groups that engaged a piece of that larger whole made him a gift that touched people far beyond Chicago and the United States. It allowed him to play an important role on the world stage. Without Richard's efforts, many of the ideas that are now seen as mainstream would not have become possible. Richard created a world community that was present in modernity, brought a continuity with the past, and gave hope for a future. Richard's gifts to the world were much more than the architectural prizes that bear his name. He appreciated all of the arts and cultures, and his curiosity and quest for beauty informed all that he undertook. The success of the Driehaus Prize, the Henry Hope Reed Award, and the many other efforts that Richard supported is tied to his understanding of how beauty guides the creation of the world. At dinners, he would often describe how so many of his efforts were shepherded by beauty. His accomplishments in the stock market, no doubt, were fueled by his instincts in assessing risk and success. But another ingredient was thinking about the future of stock prices by contemplating the aesthetics of the various curves marking their behavior at different scales of time. He would often speak about the stock market as he would about beauty. He would say, first you observe, then you revere, and finally you respond. He made it seem simple, but in fact, this way of thinking was applicable to far more than stocks. It was a way of life for him. Everyone who has been touched by Richard's generosity and spirit will know how his presence lit up the room with his ebullient personality, laughter, and smile. When with him, one felt the winds of optimism, and that one could, given the right tools and motivations, fulfill the highest of aspirations. For Richard, beauty guided everything, from stock market strategies to his love for cities, buildings, spaces, and objects of every kind. The fluidity of his mind connected all things wonderful and exquisite. He asked us all to join in the great effort to make this a better place for our contemporaries and our descendants. Richard and I have been friends and collaborated on projects beyond the prizes that bear his name for almost 20 years. Many of you have been in the trenches alongside him over these 2 decades, and on behalf of all of us, we extend our deep condolences to his family, friends, and colleagues. I will miss him beyond words, and know that each of you will as well. His life will be a reminder that we all have a duty to work for the common good through kindness, love, and pursuit of harmony in our daily lives. May he rest in peace and his life be a blessing to all he touched and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for your very touching comments. I will now welcome Elizabeth Plater-Zyberg to our virtual stage. Liz is a distinguished architect and urbanist, the founding partner of Donnie Plater-Zyberg, a co-founder of the Congress of the New Urbanism, and a professor and former dean of the School of Architecture at the University of Miami. She also has the distinction of being both a 2008 Driehaus Prize laureate, as well as a current member of the jury for the prize. Liz?
Thank you, Stephanos. Many people feel the loss of Richard Driehaus. Andres and I, and our colleagues at DPZ and the University of Miami, are grateful for the many ways he improved the world, often directly impacting our own lives. His decades-long leadership in supporting traditional architecture and urban design is now a legacy of continuing impact. Michael Licoudis introduced me to Richard Driehaus nearly 20 years ago, when he asked me to serve on that first jury of a new award established to recognize architects of contemporary classical architecture. That seemed like a capital idea, but at the time, little did we know how it would evolve. To not only encourage the efforts of brave individuals working outside the professional and academic mainstream, but also to coalesce these efforts into a society, a large family of shared values and mission. A mission, simply put, to elevate the human experience of the built environment by building on its history, acknowledging, learning from, and continuing the work of predecessors. Entering the Driehaus offices many years ago for the first prize jury meeting and seeing the exquisitely restored interiors is still a vivid memory for me. There followed numerous memories to treasure, many of them visual, that Richard made possible. Visits to the magnificent Nickerson mansion that he restored and that as a museum presents exhibits of beautiful design and art. His residences in Chicago and Lake Geneva. The automobiles. He indeed had a great eye for beauty and did much to support it. The most recent of these visual memories was sadly a kind of final gift. At the Zoom gathering for the funeral mass in Old St. Patrick's Church in Chicago. Michael tells me that Richard Driehaus supported its restoration in recent years. The close-ups of participants, the priests, the musicians, the family members reading mass texts, unwittingly allowed us to enjoy the backdrop of luscious white polished marble, intricately carved in Gaelic patterns, complex geometries and curves. How can marble do that? A fitting backdrop for a man who admired design that connects us across history and cultures, and that shows the deft hand of artisans doing the seemingly impossible. Richard's early dedication to the acts of preservation and to the organizations that promote cultural conservation and building preservation, the Chicago Bungalow Association, among them, the many others more prominent, reflects a humility rare among achievers of his stature. He was content, it seems, to admire, rescue, and see the work of others shine. It should not surprise to hear that he also supported an award for design excellence serving disadvantaged Chicago neighborhoods. All of these were part of his desire to uplift the good works of others. And while he lavished attention on Chicago and Notre Dame, his support of historical awareness, traditional practice, and classical principles also had a national and international reach. Encouraging initiatives and organizations such as the Congress for the New Urbanism, the Form-Based Code Institute, many others, and the Premio Rafael Manzano, recognizing the work of architects dedicated to preserving Spain's vernacular heritage. Working with INTBAU, spawning publications, a special summer school in Spain with students from many countries. His impact has been great and unique. The list is long. Richard's commitments and generosity were not only uplifting, but indeed also challenging to recipients. Andres and I can point to the Driehaus Prize as a prod, enabling the completion of some remarkable books. Among them, the publication of the Smart Code, to a perfection beyond anything we could have done without that support, and Heterodoxia, that also will be part of the Driehaus legacy. In this ceremony at Notre Dame, we can focus on how Richard Driehaus touched us and our interests. But we know that his commitments were broad and touched many beyond us. He often spoke of the Catholic education that served as his foundation. Michael speaks of Richard's instinctive linking of all his interests and their people. This was especially evident in the grand annual event celebrating the award winners of the prizes, the great gatherings of traditional architects in Chicago for 3 days of his annual award ceremonies. Impeccably produced, most fun, memorable, peak social event, yet another gift in many ways. A unique opportunity for a large network of colleagues to gather annually, to celebrate peer achievements, meet new counterparts, share experiences, enjoy each other's company, and to be buoyed for another year of high goals and standards. Also, an occasion importantly for the university that provided a grown-up formal social event for students to experience, an opportunity in the elevated surroundings of a grand historical urban club to mix and converse with teachers, authors, stars of their profession, and also importantly, to socialize in a not everyday manner among themselves. So, dear Richard, for all you have done for us and legions of others, we thank you. You remind us, and we can be amazed at what one person can achieve, starting with a broad vision of making the world a better place, aggregating the resources to implement that vision, and then multiplying your own efforts through those of others. By your example, you remind us of the durability and transcendence of classicism's humanist principles, suspended between the admired work of predecessors and the future work we are charged to produce. We can strive for a perspective broad and deep enough to enable the past to inspire the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz, for your very wonderful words. Thank you. Our next speaker is Richard J. Jackson. Dick is a professor emeritus at the Fielding School of Public Health at the University of California in Los Angeles. His life's work in linking the built environment with particular health outcomes and his support of the value of traditional urbanism over sprawl earned him the 2015 Henry Hope Reed Award. The award is given annually in conjunction with the Driehaus Prize to an individual working outside the practice of architecture who has promoted the appreciation, preservation, and advocacy of the traditional city. Dick?
What a pleasure to be with you all and hear the wonderful thoughts you've put forward. My own sympathy and thoughts are with all of you, and particularly to Richard's family and those who worked closely with him over the years. There are a lot of reasons that I liked Richard as a person. He was a man who accomplished so much, and yet he was true to himself and to his own values and interests, and yet he was humble in a confident way. He was different from so many of the people I've known in the worlds I've traversed, in science and medicine, politics, architecture, and urban planning. Each of these worlds had a substantial share of hungry egos, those who demand to be the center of attention. And Richard was not one of these. I recognized in him the same upbringing that I had experienced, including the nuns in grammar school and later the Jesuits. I loved his quote in Chicago Magazine about his teachers. Quote, "In addition to reading, writing, and arithmetic, they taught me 3 things. You have to continue to learn your whole life. You have to be responsible for your actions, your own actions, and you have to give something back to society," which is certainly true with Richard. I'd like to offer a personal story, and it relates to being called by Dean Lykoudis that I was to receive the Henry Hope Reed Award. Now, I knew about Richard Driehaus and his work, but I knew little about Henry Hope Reed. So I'd like to mention quickly because he must have been quite a character. Much of his life was in New York City. He led architecture tours and was deeply critical of soulless and inhumane modernist architecture. He once dismissed Frank Lloyd Wright's famous house Fallingwater as, quote, a large split level. And he dueled with New York Times architecture critic Arta Louise Huxtable, who asserted that Reed was advocating, quote, a way of building ludicrously out of character with contemporary life. I know that's outdated. No, it's not outdated now, that thinking. Reed became the keeper of Central Park and opposed buildings, intruding on a central natural space so needed by New Yorkers. He led many walking tours and was instrumental in closing the streets in Central Park on Sunday for bicycling and walking, something we now think of as common sense, which has been emulated around the world. I appreciate his demands for walking, the pedestrian, and the human realm. Reed lived to age 97, maybe in part thanks to all the walking. I saw that Reed was sometimes called a curmudgeon with a low tolerance for what he saw as nonsense. But perhaps we need more curmudgeons who demand humanity and common sense in what we build. Sadly, there are other pandemics ahead that distancing and isolation have made worse. The epidemic of obesity, type 2 diabetes, and depression. Before the shutdown, 42% of American adults were obese, up from 26% just 13 years earlier. And I am sure it is now much worse. And as obesity goes up, type 2 diabetes always follows, even for our children. When I was a young pediatrician working in the children's diabetes clinic, I never saw a child with, we called it adult onset type 2 diabetes. It is now half the children in the diabetes clinic. There are multiple causes, but one big one, I think, is because we have built America for cars. And I know Richard liked cars, but he liked their beauty. And we have created environments that push us to be indoors and inactive, exactly when we need to go about our lives in welcoming and beautiful walking and socializing and spaces. This was just common sense to Olmsted and the earlier generations. So we're living in a moment where, we hope, the pandemic is attenuating and perhaps life can return to something closer to normal by fall. But we have a lot to recover from. In honor of Richard, I hope we push to continue to support his efforts to create buildings and places that nourish the human spirit, that energize rather than deplete us. This is what Richard Driehaus and Henry Hope Reed would have wanted. Thank you to them and to all of you who carry his work forward. Richard, we miss you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dick, very much for your wonderful words. Our final speaker is the 2017 Driehaus Prize laureate, Robert Adam. Robert is a renowned British architect, a professor of architecture, an author, and a scholar. He's also a founder of INTBAU, the International Network for Traditional Building, Architecture, and Urbanism, which has managed to connect traditionalist practitioners throughout the world. Through his continuing leadership of INTBAU, Robert has been very much involved in Manzano Prize in Spain and Portugal, which with Richard's generous support has expanded over a decade to cover a wide array of awards and programs that have been remarkably impactful in these two countries and increasingly so in the rest of Europe and the wider world. Robert?
Well, everyone speaking here and everyone listening, we all are, of course, very moved by the sad and tragic death of Richard Driehaus. But I'm so pleased to be here to reflect on the huge impact he's had on my life and on so many other people. I'm very proud to have known him. I'm extremely honored to be here. I actually just, I mean, I'm the last one to speak here. I just like to remember happy things because he was actually, I always remember as such a happy person who just wanted to make the world a better, a more beautiful place. And that's how I will continue to remember him. I'm trying to work out exactly how long I'd known him. It's certainly more than 10 years. It's probably 10 to 15 years. I couldn't quite locate the date. But it was actually in connection with my charity INTBAU and the full name of INTBAU, International Network for Traditional Building, Architecture and Urbanism, which kind of encapsulates some of his passions, unfortunately reduced to an acronym. And he came over to the UK to have dinner with the Prince of Wales at his London house, Clarence House. And he sat next to the Duchess of Cornwall. I will never forget that because it was a wonderful occasion. And I remember him having a long chat with the Duchess of Cornwall. I also remember well that when we all left Clarence House, we stayed on late into the night, celebrating and talking. I think and after this, actually, he continued to support INTBAU, and he came to many occasions. And we had many good lunches and dinners in London and had long conversations, often with his great friend Michael Gallo and sometimes with Roseanne. And I must at this moment speak for all the people who in INTBAU, all the thousands of members and the international chapters, many of whom he hasn't met. And this is a typical example of how his generosity touched people and touched people that he didn't necessarily meet. We need to remember that. We're also privileged to have met him. And from INTBAU, I became involved, as has already been said, with the Manzano Prize in Spain and then in Spain and Portugal. And this also, of course, encompassed urbanism, architecture, and crafts. And this is and remains a truly remarkable series of prizes. And I want to make a particular point here because during the presentation of those prizes, I was genuinely moved and touched by the impact that, for example, it had on the craftsmen who came to these extraordinary occasions, remarkable occasions. And I actually sat on a desk and watched the family of one of the prize recipients in tears at the happiness of the occasion and the fact that their son, in this case, was receiving this prize. And this is the kind of thing that Richard could do. And at this point, of course, how much I was touched is always, I was continually touched by Richard's enthusiasm. And we've talked about this. It was, I saw this best when I was privileged to become, to receive the Driehaus Prize. And come to these remarkable gatherings. I mean, once a year, they were fantastic things. They were enormous, huge parties where I would see people I wouldn't normally see. I would see Richard. The thing I would see Richard enjoying himself so much, it was genuinely touching. His generosity was really quite remarkable. I mean, we all know about his other parties. And on one of his birthdays, his idea of a birthday was not that people would give him presents, but he would give people presents. This is a sort of a mark of the kind of man he was. But in all of this, this tremendous social activity, which he absolutely loved, he was also a deep thinker. I mean, reading some of the interviews that he had, I was genuinely impressed by not only the depth of his thought, but the way he could actually, these were interviews, these were ad-lib things, is the way he put this over with great clarity. And additionally, and I think this has also been said, is that many a person who is very successful, and he was a hugely successful man, they can often stand on ceremony and they can actually just become important because they're successful and they keep to the distance. Richard was completely the opposite. He would speak to anybody. You know, my nephew and niece came to my prize, and we'd never met before. He went and talked to them and made an impression on them. It was locked in my mind forever as Richard standing at the side of the Driehaus Prize, just loving every moment of it. So I think the other aspect of this is from the Driehaus Prize, I realized I just began to touch on all the other things that he contributed to. I don't know what all of them were, frankly, but I kept hearing about them, what he did for Chicago, what he did for underprivileged people. We talked about his museum, his private collection, which he absolutely loved showing people. Of course, his collection of cars, and even at his funeral at Old St. Patrick's, I didn't realize when I was looking at that what a contribution he'd made to that. So I can only talk about the things that I happen to know about, but I was incredibly touched by the impact that Richard just had on so many people. So, and in a way, I'd almost like to conclude with that. I just want to remember him as a tremendously generous, successful, happy person who made so many other people happy and made such a major contribution, way beyond the people he met. And we're all here to honor that. But I think more than that, and this is in a way, I have the privilege of concluding this series of talks, is that this is a legacy that we, and as everyone who's listening to this, and all of us, have an obligation to continue to keep his memory alive in all the things that he did, because there is a saying that people don't really die; they only die when the last person that actually remembers or knows them does. So we have an honor to keep. We have an obligation to keep him, his passion, all the things he did alive ourselves. And I would like to finish with that, and I'd like to again thank everyone else here for speaking, and thank Richard again and again for the impact he's had on my life, but my life is nothing compared with the impact he's had on so many other people's lives. So thank you all. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to say this. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert, for your wonderful tribute. We are now at the end of our program, and I want to thank all of our speakers for sharing their memories and their deep appreciation of Richard's life, philanthropy, and many accomplishments. I want to especially thank Kathy Rogers for her wisdom and assistance with planning this memorial event. Finally, I would like to thank Richard's friends, family, and admirers for joining us virtually today. Nothing can replace the experience, of course, of mourning together in person, but I'm grateful that we could at least do so remotely during this terrible pandemic year. Richard Driehaus, through his partnership with Notre Dame, INTBAU, and so many other institutions and organizations, created an entire new community of traditionalist architects, urbanists, allied professionals, craftspeople, and citizens. Both directly and indirectly, he brought most of us here into a family of common interests. We all owe him a profound debt of gratitude for the sense of larger purpose he instilled in us and for making all of this possible over just the past 2 decades. I feel personally blessed to be part of this family, to be here with you, and like all of you, to have been touched by Richard's goodness. And as we go forth today, I encourage you to think of how we as individuals and as a group can further the reach of this special family, expanding Richard's legacy even further around our country and in the world. By remaining inspired by his call to a radical return to our design roots, and by being only satisfied by deeds and not words. His untimely death should be a reminder that we need to act urgently and decisively while we're all still here together. The program is now finished. You will now see a series of images of Richard's life, followed by a series of images of the Driehaus Prize laureate's work. This was certainly a life well lived, with deep service to the community and commitment to the betterment of the wider world. And I want to express my deepest thanks to Richard from the bottom of my heart, of your hearts, for everything that we experienced together and for everything that we're now asked to do going forward. Thank you, Richard.